Hello and a very warm welcome to this special edition of Policy Watch. I'm Kriti Mishra. Today we'll discuss a very imperative topic, urban transformation. The flagship missions and policies launched by the government strive for planned urbanization. The aim is to achieve inclusive and sustainable urban development. In this edition, we'll take stock of all important policies, missions and programs for achieving urban renaissance. And to shed more light on the subject, I'm joined by Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri, Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, sir. By 2030, half of India's population would be living in the urban sectors. In fact, the government had constituted a panel to develop a framework for comprehensive policy for robust urban transformation. When will that policy see the light of day?
Well, I liked your introduction of the subject. You spoke of strive for planned urbanization. By 2030, 40% of our population will be living in urban spaces. That should make it a whopping 600 million. So the global urban population is already close to 50%. Ours will be 40% by 2030. There's been a paradigmatic shift after Prime Minister Modi, his government was formed in May 2014. Contrary to the earlier phase, I think the policymakers and the Prime Minister personally saw the importance of urbanization, acknowledged the neglect to which the urban sector had been subjected in the past, and decided to convert it into a win-win. Now, the flagship programs which were introduced following the new government's installation in May 2014. The Swachh Bharat scheme was announced on August 15, 2014 from the ramparts of the Red Fort. That's where the inspiration came from. Most of the other schemes were announced after the homework had been done in June 2015. So if you take these schemes collectively, they constitute the most comprehensive and ambitious program for planned urbanization. I used to earlier be very careful, and I used to say maybe in the democratic world, because China has had a very successful experience. But I am more confident now, because if you look at China's transformation, it was a very heavy also on other infrastructure. When it comes to planned urbanization, if you look at where we were and where we are heading, I think this is the most ambitious and comprehensive program. Within that, you keep looking at other issues. So you have the Swachh Bharat mission, you have AMRUT, you have Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, you have the Smart Cities program, you have urban transportation like metro. Today we inaugurated 18 kilometers to take the Delhi metro up to 314 kilometers. By the end of December, it will be somewhere near 350 kilometers. So all this is very fundamentally going to alter the urban space. You can call it transformation. My distinguished predecessor in office, who's now the Honorable Vice President,
yes,
he uses the word urban renaissance. Renaissance has a European thing also. But I think there's a lot of work underway. We have a long distance to travel. But I think the figures thus far are encouraging.
Right. You mentioned about Smart City Mission. Now, that never fails to garner our interest. In fact, in the budget 2018-19, it received a whopping 54% jump. How has been the performance of Smart City Mission as far as the Greenfield and Brownfield projects are concerned?
Well, the first clarification I must provide to you and through you to your viewers is that when we initially conceptualized the smart cities, and I'm going back to the Bharatiya Janata Party manifesto, I think we had 100 new smart cities in mind.
Yes.
When we got down to the work, the fact is that we realized that before you go to 100 new smart cities, you've got to deal with many of them as brownfield projects.
Absolutely.
So since this is a citizen-centric, stakeholder concentrated discussion which gives rise, we invited proposals from all aspiring urban centers and cities. And out of the 100 chosen, 90 were brownfield. That is, you take the existing cities and you take the steps necessary to redevelop them, order them, etc. 10 of them are greenfield projects. Now, the scheme itself was announced in June 2015. But the 100 smart cities were selected in 4 tranches, starting June 2015, which means the first lot was, I think, announced in January 2016, and the last lot as late as February 2018.
Right.
Now, out of the 100 cities, 11 already have functioning integrated command and control centers. 22 more are being processed for tendering, and 27 are underway. I am persuaded by the feedback that I get that this scheme, which is to be completed by 2022, by December of 2019, we will have 50 integrated command and control centers functional. By December 2019, which is a good 3 years ahead of time. Now, the Smart City project is a very ambitious project. I mean, it has outlay of more than 200,000 crores. Right. It is a design which is based on some central government monetary contribution, state government having to raise money, some in the PPP mode, private public partnership.
Right.
If you look at the fact that the scheme started in 2015, June, it was announced, started in 2016. The first, since we have had no experience of building smart cities, we naturally needed to look outside. Each of these smart cities requires a project management consultant. It requires a special purpose vehicle because you want to insulate the scheme from populist pressures.
Right.
The good news is that we've got PMCs and SPVs in place in most of the cases, number one. The contracting which had taken place by the time we came to office, but by the time I joined in September 2013, only 8,000 crores had been done. So when I was asked this question, where are the smart cities? I would always look at the figures and say, between June of 2018 and December of 2018, you will see the first physical manifestations of the smart cities.
Right.
Today, we are in October. I think the contracting of projects under, which are being constructed is about 40,000 crores. And by December of this year, it would be about 50,000 crores. Well, all the projects are picking up. Once a project is in place, you see, unlike a greenfield project where literally you can build from scratch and you can build to your heart's content and to designs which are totally modern, most of these old cities are high density urban areas,
right,
which were selected. But I think the going is good. The rate of implementation of the projects is very satisfactory.
Okay.
And I think by the time the whole scheme is done, I would think this is 100 smart cities will rank as the fastest implemented project in most parts of the world.
Right. That's a big takeaway. Coming to affordable housing now. 12 million houses by the year 2022.
11 or 12, yeah.
11 or 12 million houses by the year 2022 under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Housing for All. 62 lakh houses have already been sanctioned. How are the states faring, and what are the measures that you have unveiled to ensure that this project is completed within the stipulated time period or even before?
We see, in any typical housing project, you require an assured demand that there should be beneficiaries from the scheme. You require land, and that's the most tricky most of the time.
Absolutely.
Because A, you have to ensure that land is available. B, that land is affordable. C, you have to ensure that those who are going to be beneficiaries and going to be having access to the project also require funding, or you will give subsidies. Now, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is a happy combination of all this. First and foremost, it's the state which is providing land. That already takes care of about 40 to 60% of your cost. If the state is providing land and the number of demanders or beneficiaries or allottees are short, you just have to make sure that there's no misuse in that, or procedures are properly followed, and the beneficiaries who get the place are the ones who really for whom it is intended.
Right.
And then you're providing a system of subsidies.
Yes.
Whereby under one category, the credit-linked subsidy scheme, if you are a young professional and you want to take a loan to buy an apartment, and you go to a bank, typically bank says 12-13%. if you're a member or somebody who can be characterized as being under the economically weaker section, you will get 4% interest subvention. Lower income group 4% interest subvention. Middle income group 3% interest subvention. So the government would pay that as a loan, give you money upfront when you're applying for it. Under affordable housing in partnership, you get some money from the state government, some from the central government, with the state government providing the land. Again, it's a win-win. Under beneficiary-led development, if you have a traditional ancestral home and it needs to be done up, the government will give you typically 150,000. And finally, the in-situ slum rehabilitation. What we did in Katputli colony, where we are hoping to settle 2,800 families in their old homes, which were characterized by rundown, disrepair, squalor. Here, because the slums typically rise in the heart of cities where people come looking for work, clearly they have to be settled there. I mean, a previous government in 1975 did away with civil liberties and tried to settle people in what was called the emergency in far-flung places. It doesn't work. Ours is a robust democracy, and you have to provide resettled people. It has to be near their place of work or on an as-is, where-is basis. All four verticals are doing very well. Last month in September, when we do the annual monthly meeting, we sanctioned 628,000 homes. Yesterday, in the meeting that took place, I think we sanctioned something like 230,000. You're right. Out of the 11 million to be sanctioned, 6.2 million have already been sanctioned.
Right.
Something like 3.4 or 3.5 million have been grounded, and another million plus have been handed over. Kriti, what happens in these cases is that the initial phase, when you have to locate the land, that is a little time consuming.
Right.
But once you've located the land and you have got your model right, you know the beneficiaries, you've got a contractor, then things move very fast, because you are now using technology where one floor can come up in a week's time.
True.
So it's very important to look at the figure of sanctioning. It's also very important to look at the figure of houses grounded, because once the homes have been grounded, then the ability to deliver is much faster.
Right. Talking about AMRUT now, how are you reviewing the progress of projects under AMRUT?
AMRUT is doing very well. It's a scheme which started, as I said, like the others, in June 2015. It has to finish by 2020.
Right.
My difficulty with AMRUT is not with AMRUT per se. AMRUT covers something like 60-65% of our urban areas, cities. Those who are not covered by the scheme, which were either cities which applied in the initial phase when 500 cities had to be selected. So there were some applications which did not make it. Some cities did not have the required cutoff population of 100,000. Others, because you could only comment 500. So I think the time has come for us now to look at an AMRUT Plus scheme. I know whenever I start this, I am reminded by my friends, including the finance minister and others, that you've got a scheme still running. How can you look at a successor scheme? But I'm hoping that by the time we do the budget next year, we at least have the concept and design of an AMRUT Plus, because I get a lot of representation from my counterparts in state governments, from chief ministers, who want more and more of their cities to be covered by AMRUT so that it can deal with water tap connections, sewage treatment, stormwater drainage, and so on.
Can you elucidate a bit more on AMRUT Plus?
Well, if you have already got 60% of your urban cities covered, that means to start with 30% are not covered. Now, all 30% may not need an AMRUT type of scheme. It's quite possible.
Yes.
Some cities don't need water tap connection and sewage treatment. They already have it. But let me say, if I were, to go on the drawing board, by AMRUT Plus, I would say an AMRUT kind of scheme with maybe lesser numbers. You don't need 500. You need maybe 10% of that. But this is just a thought off the back of my head. But I think in the coming months, I've already requested my colleagues in the ministry to start looking at where the demands are. I get a lot of letters to which I say that I'm afraid AMRUT now cannot be reopened because it's at an advanced stage of implementation.
Right.
But should we, and I have to, it cannot be an assurance, should we look at a successor scheme in the form of AMRUT Plus yes, your proposal would get very high consideration.
Right. With that, we'll slip into a short break now. Lots more on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Policy Watch. Our discussion on urban transformation continues. Mr. Puri, talking about Swachh Bharat Abhiyan now. Prime Minister says that Swachh Bharat Abhiyan seems to have the biggest domino effect in the world. 94% sanitation coverage has been achieved. But do you think there has been a behavioural change as well?
Well, when you analyze something as revolutionary as the Swachh Bharat mission, it has two components. One is the physical targets, the number of toilets you have to build in the urban areas, that's what I'm familiar with. Individual household toilets, public community toilets. You can quantify that. But quantifying with precision, behavioral change is very difficult. You can look at a trend. You're making the toilets maintenance initially was problematic. Some people tell me even now there are issues. That will be a continuing issue. We have to go on improving. On Swachhata, there is an app. If you take a picture with that app and show some garbage collected somewhere, it has a compliance over 90%. You know, so the minute you send that picture, somebody will take action and they will address it. But behavioral change means people should stop littering.
Right.
I'm not sure that we've reached that. And I'm not sure that anybody can guarantee that. Behavioral change, to be totally successful, which means you must not only use the toilet, but use the toilet correctly. I mean, as you see, statements, please leave it in a situation so that the next person coming in is also able to use it. It's work in progress. As I keep saying, the good news is that this is a project of the government which has become a project of the people. It's a Jan Andolan. Behavioral change is evident, but we still have a distance to travel. And I think you can devise the best policy in the world in terms of technical evaluation, in terms of safeguards. But the behavioral change and the implementation of that comes with a passage of time.
And is there any proposal to hike incentive or subsidy for construction of toilets?
I'm not aware of that. You come across a request sometimes, Kriti, from the northeast where the construction costs are much higher.
Right.
Because, transporting material. And we've done something. If there are other issues, we look at them. I mean, I was recently in Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. Sikkim is doing extremely well. It's very clean. Civic consciousness is very high. And I give full marks to the Chief Minister and the, urban local bodies and to the administrators, etc. Arunachal Pradesh, the terrain is more difficult, but they're trying. If somebody needs help, we'll look at it.
Right. Talking about the real estate sector now, sir. 30,000 real estate projects and 25,000 agents are under the RERA Act. You've gone on record to say that fly-by-night builders have to be eliminated, and you've said that government is committed to providing solution to the home buyers. Of course, NBCC...
100%. They are your citizens, the home buyers. They have been duped. Many of them unknowingly. Some of them went into projects which they didn't do their homework. Some of the buyers were people who, let's say, had a little bit of extra money or unaccounted for money. But that's not the issue. The fact is, there was a buyer-seller agreement, and if you have large-scale defaults, I mean, I'm dealing with the problem in the instant case. First of all, land is a state subject.
Right.
I could easily sit back and turn around and say, this is not a problem of the central government's making. I mean, whichever state government is it, whatever happened, you deal. But that's not the attitude we are taking. We are actually stepping in with positive intervention in whatever way we can. In one of the areas that we are dealing with, Noida, Greater Noida and Yamuna Expressway, there the Honorable Supreme Court is seized with it. So obviously, I cannot discuss the specific modalities of what we have in mind because the court is seized of that. We had set up a committee under the chairmanship of the Secretary in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. That committee has given recommendations. Those recommendations are in the public domain. And I think with the direction of the court, this will happen. Now, RERA and the real estate sector deal with the same thing. RERA has to succeed. It's a very good piece of legislation. RERA has frontally confronted the vested interests there. The people therefore tried to derail RERA. They mounted a legal challenge to it.
Yes.
We won the case in the Mumbai High Court, where the Supreme Court had remitted it to. RERA is here to stay. And the history of this period will be pre-RERA and post-RERA. RERA also means that all projects have to be registered. There cannot be any tweaking on ongoing projects. Agents have to be registered. Money that you take for a new project has to be put in an escrow account, and 70% can only be used on that project.
Right.
So some of the malpractices which we had earlier, that a buyer or a promoter took money from a home buyer and then diverted it to purchasing a land bank, that's no longer possible. But we have to find solutions for those affected people. There were 100,000 in the in between Noida, Greater Noida, and the Yamuna Expressway. I am confident that with the discussions that we've had, with the action which the Honorable Supreme Court is taking, the involvement of other parties, and the Supreme Court has directed NBCC, for instance, to deal with it. And I think there will be a cost to be paid. I mean, if it goes to the IBCC process or etc. But we need to find new people who can come in and take over those projects. But as I said, I'm confident it can be done.
Right. Talking about urban flooding now, there is also a policy in the offing to prevent urban flooding?
Well, look, every time a disaster takes place, natural or man-made, we all get very excited and say we must do something about it. So, I was very clear after the Kerala flooding, I was very clear that as soon as matters settle a bit, the floodwaters recede, etc., we would do a in-depth study. And that study, we had a day-long seminar in the National Institute of Urban Affairs, where we brought in all the experts, all the people who had the experience of the Chennai floods, the other floods earlier, and they came up with a number of recommendations. Those recommendations are now being processed, and those recommendations will be passed on. You know, the problem is that today disasters, which are of two kinds, man-made and natural, though the line of division between the two is narrowing.
Right.
Now, if you don't take remedial action against climate change, if you don't, take those steps which you are required to as part of your obligation or other, and the Earth's surface keeps getting heated, then, normal rainstorms become hurricanes and floods, cloudbursts can do damage.
True.
Similarly with earthquakes, etc. So, land is a state subject, but we as the central government, following these discussions, we make recommendations and we put in place, we have no choice but to put in place systems, early warning systems, communication in times of such thing. And I think India is one of the few countries in the world which has the heavy lifting capacity in terms of dealing with natural disasters.
Right. Mr. Puri, coming to the last question now. United Nations Sustainable Development Goals require the world leaders to make their cities more safe, resilient and inclusive. How do you outline India's journey for achieving those larger objectives?
Well, let me tell you two things. One is India firmly is wedded to Goal 11. India is also wedded to all the goals. You know, the philosophy of the Sustainable Development Goals essentially echoes our traditional philosophy from Sarvodaya to Antyodaya, to the farthest first, those who are the most underprivileged. In fact, out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the urban local bodies that I deal with, they deal with 11 of them. So, in fact, when I was appointed minister, somebody was asking, this guy spent 4 decades dealing with foreign policy, security policy. Kevin Rudd, whom I worked with, in the Independent Commission, he's the only one who turned and said, wait a minute, he's been dealing with sustainable development. This is exactly what this portfolio is all about. Look, SDGs will succeed because India will succeed. And India has to succeed for the SDGs to succeed. I've been saying it for a long time. The Millennium Development Goals succeeded because China was able to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty with some help from countries like India.
Right.
But the Sustainable Development Goals, Sustainable Cities, Goal 11, or the other goals, Goal 5, female and gender equality, female empowerment, etc. Look, I'm convinced that it's there. The Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in September 2015. Our flagship missions were announced in June 2015, more than a year and 3 months or 4 months before that. So we have this internal momentum, and the Prime Minister's flagship programs ensure that traction. So we're going to get there, and because we are going to get there before 2030, the 2030 package will also succeed.
Right. On that note, thank you so much for joining us. With that, it's a wrap on this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Rajya Sabha Television.